Hello and a very warm welcome to Political Economy with Shweta Punj. You are watching Money Control. Well, India has just elected a new government. There's a parliament session going on. And one of the first big things that have happened is the implementation of the new criminal laws that were passed in the previous session of the parliament. Now, why are these significant? These are significant because they are replacing the British era laws that had been part of the India's criminal justice system. The new laws, BNS, BNSS, and BSB, are replacing the Indian Penal Code, the CRPC, and the Indian Evidence Act. Today, we are discussing the significance of these new criminal laws. Do they take the concept of justice forward in India? And most importantly, what are the challenges that the implementation of these laws could see as they get rolled out in the rest of the country? To understand this, I have with me Niharika Karanjawala of Karanjawala and Company. As we know, the Karanjawala and Company is one of India's most significant and one of most India's recognized criminal law firms. Niharika, thank you so much for joining us on Political
Tha-
Economy.
Thank you for having me on, Shweta. Very happy to be here.
Thank you, Niharika. So today you are going to be defogging these very complicated criminal laws, which are actually even difficult to pronounce for a lot of a big part of the country, especially in the southern part. So
Absolutely.
there's a lot of feedback coming in that what are these laws? And yesterday there was a newspaper story about a police station which is on Parliament Street, which was completely geared up to implement these laws, and a police station in another part of the country which was completely not prepared. So, Niharika, your first thoughts on these criminal laws, the new criminal laws, how are they taking the concept of justice in India forward?
Right. So, Shweta, one thing we have to look at is contextually in the sense that this is one of the largest overhauls of a section of the law that we've seen in recent times, right? This is completely overhauling the substantive criminal law, the procedural law, and the law related to evidence. So, in a sense, it is changing the criminal justice system as a whole. And uh, right now we can just give first impressions, what jumps out at us, but all of the hurdles that have to be crossed will only really become apparent as the weeks and months go by and this law is put into active practice. Now
Right.
what jumped the first impressions that I got were there are a lot of very useful things that have been added to these laws. Like, for example, one of the provisions I was happy to see was the provision for community service as a form of punishment for petty offenses. I think that's very useful. I think much rather than, in the sense, in the case of petty offenses, more often than not, we see a scenario where a person goes through a trial, but ultimately the offense is not substantial enough. And with overcrowding of prisons and things like that, the court doesn't actually award any jail time. Community service is a significantly low cost alternative that will also be useful to the community as a whole and serve to teach offenders, especially
Hmm.
offenders who still have room to turn things around for themselves, a
Right.
valuable lesson and contribute to society. So I think the provisions related to community service, for example, are very welcome. I also think provisions related to advancement in forensics and streamlining the system of forensics and investigation, especially, I mean, I'm an enthusiast of forensic technology and criminal investigation myself, and I'll give you a few examples when we address it more fully later in the session. I'll give you a few examples of cases I myself have worked on that
Hmm.
suffered considerably from a lack of proper forensic investigation during the initial few days of the crime. So that is something I was very, very happy to see. What
Right.
I was
So until
also,
now, we did not
sorry,
have, until now, sorry to interrupt you there, but
no, go
until
ahead.
now, you're saying we did not have like a robust forensic investigation ecosystem?
We have the provisions, we have a lot of talent. What we really require is some heavy streamlining and proper proper training of first responders. If I can get into it for a moment, one of the trials I worked on was the Arushi Talwar trial. It started in 2008 and it had become quite sensational in the media for quite a while. And I represented her parents, and they were eventually acquitted, happily so, by the Allahabad High Court.
It
Now,
took such a
it
long time, right?
it took
It
a
took,
very long time. It took a
yeah,
very long time.
and the way that investigation was treated, as in
Absolutely.
there was it
Absolutely.
almost seems like there was no SOP, no protocol. Everything was washed out.
Absolutely.
All the evidence was cleaned out from whatever
Absolutely.
I've seen. Yeah.
Definitely. And one of the main problems with that case, one of the main problems with that case was first responders were not adequately equipped to handle what they faced there. So the first
Correct.
responders from the Noida police, when they arrived there on the morning of the 16th of May 2008, they didn't cordon off the crime scene. Now, this is one of the
Mm.
very basic things that you do. It's the first thing you do because otherwise, in 12 hours, any crime scene is corrupted. You can pretty much take it as a write off. And by
Mm.
international standards, they take it as a write off that it's a completely corrupted crime scene. Now, in those instances, what wound up happening was a lot of the first responders that arrived, and I could tell this because I read their police statements, the initial 121 statements they made. A lot of them were not fully prepared to deal with a murder situation. It was a beat cop. It was a young lady police officer who was she was a young girl. She had started out in her practice. She had never seen a dead body before. Now, since
Mm.
this dealt with the dead body of a young girl, they needed to have a female officer present and they needed to have a female officer investigating. So when they told her to look at the body, the first thing she says she did in the police statement was she says she flipped the body over. Now, photographs had not been taken at this time. I'm sure you recall at the time the big issue that had risen in
Mm.
public opinion and in the media of the manner in which the body was found, which is all determined by photographs. So, if the crime
Right.
scene is disturbed before a photograph is taken, all of that is just
Mm.
speculation on false grounds, right?
Mm.
So, she said that she flipped the body over, then she flipped the body back, then she said she was feeling very nervous because she'd never seen a dead body before and she started feeling a little sick. So she went and sat outside. Now, at some level, I have a lot of sympathy for this police officer
Yeah.
because she was not trained for what she was likely to face in the field. And this, I feel,
Absolutely.
is a problem across the board. So I have a lot of sympathy from that perspective. From
Sure.
another perspective, however, cases cannot be compromised. The murder of a young child cannot be
Absolutely.
compromised because
Absolutely.
the police officer has never seen a dead body before and has gotten nervous. So,
Right.
this is a huge problem. Another problem that had occurred was since the crime scene was not cordoned off, members of the media, members of the general public, everybody was just coming and going and having a looky loo here and there to see what's going on, what's going on. People were picking things up, putting things down. Oh, is this evidence? Is this not evidence? And as a result, what wound up happening was there were only 26 fingerprints taken from the crime scene. Now, being someone who
Mm.
is somewhat familiar with forensic investigation, for a domestic household, this is a very small number of prints. These are not the number of prints that should be taken from a domestic household. You should take several hundred sets of prints because you should
Right.
fingerprint everywhere, right? So in any case, so those are flawed ways in which this was all implemented. And out of those 26 prints, 24 were smudged. So you had two prints to go on, and those two prints belonged to nobody who was under suspicion, nobody at the scene. Now, the problem here is it could have been any one of those people walking in and out, picking things up and putting things down. B, another huge flaw in this case was when they did the autopsies, they never took the fingerprints of both the deceased persons. They neither took Arushi's fingerprints nor did they take Hemraj's fingerprints. So, as a result, once the bodies are cremated, that is evidence that you have lost forever and you can never get back. And to the extent that I mean technology is so advanced now that even if a body is in such an advanced stage of decomposition that you can't take prints, which neither of these bodies were, you are advised in international guidelines on this to sever and preserve the fingers so that they can
Absolutely.
be kept as evidentiary value. So, from that perspective, while all of this was available, while there were crime scene photographers. Now, again, with the crime scene photographer, one of the problems that happened in the case of Hemraj was the crime scene photographer got stuck in traffic. So, because the body had been out in the May sun for a full 24 hours already, because as you recall, his body was discovered on the 17th, they decided
Right.
to send the body to the post-mortem house and take photographs later. And the photographs were taken the next day after the post-mortem was already done. So now not
Mm.
only do you have a situation where you have no photographs of that body at the crime scene, so
Mm.
trying to reconstruct what happens is practically impossible. You
Mm.
also have a scenario where the post-mortem wounding and the post-mortem stitching and staining is so bad that it's practically
Mm.
impossible to tell the difference between that and the wounds, right? So
Mm.
while all of this was available to us, there was no streamlined system in which it was applied. Now, one of the things I appreciate here, it says forensic experts must be present at every crime scene of a serious crime. I really appreciate that, because in a lot of instances, evidence is not gathered, especially in smaller towns and cities. Here we were dealing with a case in a large city, but especially in smaller towns and whatnot, things like this don't wind up being implemented. But if they are, it will be a huge boon to our system. I also think further, more policy changes are required there. Like, for example, I think you should have a certain number of mandated photographs that are taken at a crime
Mm.
scene. I think you should have, like, for example, in the Talwar matter, again, coming back to that, like I said, of Hebraj's body, there were no photographs at the scene. Of Arushi's body, there were 5 photographs taken of the scene. That's not enough. You have to take them from proper angles. It has to be mandated that the crime scene cannot be disturbed before photographs are taken. If for whatever reason the crime scene is disturbed, this must be recorded, because then it is of a lot of significance for people who are later putting this case together in the months and
Right.
years that follow to.
Absolutely. So now in the new laws, there is an SOP for such cases.
Not fully. What it mandates is that forensic experts must be available. There are other forms of forensic technology also that have been utilized, such as better tracking of crimes and criminals. So tracking of criminals across state borders, and with a country that
Mm.
has porous borders like India, that will also be immensely beneficial. Another thing that could have been considered, that could have improved the system further, but has not been considered, is something to the effect of a victim database. Like in the United States, you have VICAP, which records all victims across the states and is available across the states. So if crimes are happening in various states cross-referentially, you can tell. Now, for example, I'll give you another example of a very popular case that was in the media very significantly, was the Sheena Bora case. Now,
Right.
in that case, as you recall, the young lady's body was found in the woods, and without DNA testing at the time when it was initially found, because it was initially found just a day or so after the crime had occurred. And at that time, without doing proper photography, DNA typing, anything of that sort, the body was reburied at that spot. Now, that again is something that should not happen. Why is the body reburied? If this cannot be considered a natural death in any circumstances, the burnt body of a young lady is found. So, those remains, even if the remains are not identified, they must be brought in as Jane Doe remains, and they must be kept. DNA typing must be done, everything must be put into effect, and they must be preserved in evidence at the time that they are found, so that they can be of as much use later as is possible. So, if we look to streamlining this kind of system, it will take our criminal justice process leaps and bounds into the future. It will help significantly. Even if we do something as small as, my husband and I discuss this very often, because we both have a tremendous interest in forensics and criminal justice. And one thing we discuss a lot is the possible uh, establishment of something akin to a detective bureau in India, where, for example, in the case of serious offenses, in the case of violent offenses, first responders only lock down the scene. They don't do any of the investigation themselves.
Right.
A specialized version, a specialized section of investigators are brought in to do the actual investigations. First responders just secure the scene. So, since we were doing such a massive overhaul of the laws, if maybe a little more time debating had gone into it, and there's still time, as the Honorable Home Minister said, discussion can be had, the laws will evolve, and they will. But since such a massive overhaul was happening,
Hmm.
I feel it would have been best for our system if a little more debate had taken place and benefits such as these had been brought into the system from this point forward.
Interesting. You raised some very significant points there, because this is a big overhaul, but you're right, as in what the Home Minister said yesterday, this is work in progress. We probably moved the goalpost a little bit forward from what it was, but it's not entirely perfect. A couple of things that stand out. One is a death sentence for child rape, which is a
Yes,
big leap
yes,
forward in deterring the
yes,
crime, I think, because
yes,
from what we've seen, these cases go on for years and years,
yes,
and it does not always necessarily lead to capital punishment. In many
absolutely.
cases, 20 years in jail for gang rape. uh,
Yes.
so how is that different? As in, what was it under IPC? Was there a specific punishment, for gang rapes? Was that
So
something that
till
was
now,
studied?
yeah, under the Criminal Law Amendment Act, there had been, it wasn't this high. It went to this high and also potentially death if the person went into a coma. But gang rape itself was not this high all on its own. Uh, Under the previous criminal law amendment that came in 2013. As for death penalty for child rapists, I also think this is a welcome move. And till now, we have been very hesitant to bring in the death penalty for rape. And another thing I would like to highlight here is, while I am not while I am not fully pro the death penalty in rape cases, I feel that child rape cases are at a slightly different level, and I'll tell you why. Because when we look at adult rape, it's more of an opportunistic crime where the persons are unrelated to the victim. It's more of an opportunistic crime where you find it is a crime of power and suppression, where you find a person in a vulnerable moment and you take advantage in that moment. And one of the reasons that the law has been hesitant to put a death penalty to it is because it incentivizes killing of the victim. Because if it is such a large penalty in any case, and in most rape cases, the victim has seen and would be able to identify the offender. So in that case, there's an incentive to simply kill the victim so that they cannot potentially identify
Right.
the offender. In child rape cases, however, what we find statistically is a majority of the time, the offender is a person known to the child. It's not a sudden, one time, opportunistic incident that's happening. It's sort of a continual abuse that's happening, sometimes by a family member, sometimes by a neighbor, sometimes by somebody in the child's vicinity. More often than not, they are people known to the child. So, from that perspective, I think child rape and rape as an offense by itself tend to psychologically and logistically occupy two different grounds. So, I don't think the provision of the death penalty would have the same dangers in a child rape case, and as a result, I'm not opposed to the death penalty for child rapists. And if it provides a deterrent, of course, uh,
Mm.
that is a tremendously useful thing. Another thing we must do with child rape, which is something that I feel heavily the government must take on, awareness campaigns and education campaigns. More often than not in India, the problem with child rape is it is covered up by the family,
That's
who
right.
feel
Yeah.
the child will move on. And especially if the person is a known person, is a family member, that it
You're
will
right.
bring shame upon the entire family if something like this is brought to light. That
Mm.
is a system that must be broken. And
Right.
these are things that from a policy perspective and from an awareness perspective, huge campaigns I feel should be undertaken. Because
Absolutely.
it's not something a child is just going to get over. It's not something that we can afford to sweep under the rug in any
Absolutely.
circumstance.
But in your view, a death sentence for child rape, do you think it'll act as a deterrent? And any implementation issues that you see in this? Like, typically, when such a
Um,
case comes into the court,
See,
what?
what we will have to be cautious about, which you have to be cautious about for every case which has serious penalties. Every case, of course, has penalties and has a cost for the accused. So everything has to be applied by the book. One thing we must make sure of is there are also a large number of false cases where children have been tutored, right? So judges have to ensure, and this is to take out vendettas against people and things like that. So now, especially in those cases, judges have to ensure that there is a balance, because usually in child rape cases, as they should, judges are very, very protective about the manner in which a child can be cross-examined while on the stand. And I am fully in support of that. They ought to be protective of that. However, that being said, judges themselves must be acutely watchful for instances of science where children have been tutored and where the testimony may have been manipulated by their parents or by somebody else in their atmosphere. I also feel, as with all cases involving the death penalty, and I am pro death penalty, but I also feel that the rule of rarest of the rare must be upheld. That was brought in for a reason, and I am
Okay.
pro that. I am not pro the granting of a death penalty in every case in which it can be granted.
Sure. Okay. Also, another thing that seems interesting is that women minors and seniors are exempt from going to the police station. How will that work out?
So in the evenings, there has always been this law that a woman is not arrested between 7 in the evening to 7 in the morning, and these are all protective laws. I feel that for seniors and female minors, this will be a beneficial thing. We have to see this from two perspectives. One, we have to make sure that our police force is robust enough that the fact that they do not have to come into the police station does not mean that a police officer does not expeditiously go and visit them
Yeah, so
and
that's what I'm
speak with them.
wondering. If I
Yes,
need to get a complaint
yes,
registered, what do I do if I don't want to go to the police station? Is
yeah,
your digital, I mean, do
yeah.
I go the digital way?
Yeah,
How do I go about it?
now they have an online provision. Now they have an online provision, and I would think that what should be done in instances like this is a an officer must be designated expeditiously to go and interview the senior lady or the minor girl at their home or at a place that is comfortable to them. In cases of minors, certainly a social worker should also be present. And I feel that that would be the best way to move forward with this, but this will be a logistical hurdle. We'll see. This is a law that is very, very good in intent, very good in intent.
Hmm.
However, in implementation, we must be cautious to make sure that it is properly applied.
Hmm. Also, for the first time, terrorism has been defined, Niharika, which
Yeah.
is quite interesting. I did not even realize
Yes.
that we did not have a definition of
Yeah.
terrorism.
Not under the IPC. We didn't have it under the IPC. We had it under special terrorist statutes. Now it has
Right.
been included in the main criminal law as well. Now this again, it's a good provision because I feel there is no harm in defining things. Organized crime has also been defined. Economic offenses have also been defined. All of these are good things. One of the fears people have with regards to terrorism is, and the definition of terrorism is that they feel that it could be interpreted in a slightly wide sense and it may be applied to cases that are not in actuality terrorist cases. So again, we have a provision here that is good in intent, and we must be cautious to ensure that it is good in implementation as well, and there is no abusive process to simply uh, sweep other cases that may not be terrorist related in with terrorism. We have to ensure that that does not happen.
Okay, okay. Also, what's interesting is there's a new section on organized crime.
Yes,
That's an interesting
that is interesting, and
that's an
I feel
interesting
that absolutely. Organized crime, economic offenses, theft
mm,
has been widened to include things like data theft, identity theft, non
mm,
theft of intangible things. And I think this all represents a significant moving forward with the ages of our laws. These are things that were required in the law,
mm,
and it is a very good thing. It is taking the law into the modern age, and it's a very good
right.
thing that these are being applied in specific offenses.
Mm. Also, 1 year jail for bribing voters during elections. That uh, I'm not. I would love to
Again,
see
it
how
comes
that
down.
gets done.
I'd love to see it. I'd love to see it implemented, but again, it comes down to whether there is implementation. A lot of laws remain on the books. It is a law in theory,
Absolutely.
And is it actually going to be something that is properly implemented? Is it going to be something that is implemented only against one's political enemies, or is it going to be implemented across the board? How is it actually going to take place? These are only things we can see in the months and years to follow. These are only things we can see once the law is actually in progress and actually applied.
Right. So, the overarching opinion seems to be that the new set of laws are for women and they are focused towards children. But there is a counter view to it as well. In terms of women, there is a provision that says that if a woman reports a rape or any forceful act, that can be construed as a more serious crime, and the punishment will be according to the crime that it's being viewed as. This could go either way, right?
It could heavily go either way. It could heavily go either way. And the law, in terms of cases, in terms of crimes such as rape, has always and for a while has been something that can go either way. Even the 2013 amendment, what we saw significantly after that was that women's
Mm,
employment plummeted. I feel that there a significant mistake made was not bringing forward a gradation in the
mm,
law, because you had something going from the barest touch to violent rape, just short of putting somebody in a coma, all looked at the same level. So I feel it also should have been looked at with a significant gradation in the law itself, and that would have been more beneficial to women. I have also never been a fan of the gender specificity of the section. I feel it should be gender neutral. I don't think there's any benefit in saying that only males can rape and only females can be raped, because I feel that you are leaving out a potential section of victims. And now,
Also, Niharika,
especially,
just to come in here,
yeah.
also some one very interesting thing, which again could go either way, is that men could face 10 years in prison for making false promises of marriage.
Yeah, now that is also something that can be misused heavily, because it comes down to a he said, she said scenario largely, right?
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
that isn't something, so that is something that the courts will have to be the courts will have to be cautious in implementing. The real story will have to come out, I suppose, in cross examination.
Mm.
And yeah, that is how that would have to go down, because these laws are hard to implement. A promise to marry is something, if it's something said orally, made orally, and in those circumstances is put forward, we've seen under the law previously also that this has been a section that is prone to misuse, and it can be prone to misuse now as well. So it is something that the courts will have to guard against, and the police will have to make sure that they do not make slapdash arrests and do not demand custody for longer than is required. So all of these, one has to make sure that there is no abuse of process in how these
Okay.
are implemented, because these can be laws that can be hugely beneficial or hugely detrimental depending on how they are implemented.
So currently, as we speak today, we have two sets of criminal laws that are applicable in the country, because IPC cases will continue until they are closed, and new cases are being registered under the three Bharat Acts,
Yeah,
the three
yeah,
criminal
yeah, yeah.
laws. So, isn't that going to be chaos for some time?
It will definitely require an adjustment period. It will certainly require an adjustment period, because, yes, as you said, all ongoing cases that were registered at a time when the IPC was still in force will continue, and those will continue for at least the next 20-25 years, let's say. And
Right.
now the new cases under the new Bharat laws will be generated and will commence. So, yeah, there would be the requirement of a bit of an adjustment period here. That being said, with the bringing in of any new law, I think it'll be the same from that perspective, because the courts will be well versed in application of the IPC, as will lawyers. And in the bringing
Hmm.
in of any new law, there's a small adjustment period where the courts and litigants and lawyers get used to the application of the new law. One of the things I think we do need to look into significantly is police training, because what I read was training has been imparted to 100 police stations. Now, when we look at this in the scale of the size of the country and the number of police
Yeah.
stations, 100 police stations is next to nothing. And often because of the expense involved and because of the
Hmm.
large workload that the police carry, often they are not sent for adequate training. So that is something we must ensure is done properly. We must ensure that there is full understanding of
Right.
these laws, especially like you said
So,
earlier with regards to even the
Niharika, just let
translation.
me,
Yeah.
yeah, just one quick thing. Now, one big thing that plagues the Indian justice system is timely delivery of justice. Cases tend to
Yes.
go on for years. It takes forever to get an FIR done. Investigations take a very long time. Do these new criminal laws address that? Are there any strict enforceable timelines
Now, in
that
the case of
we
women
can
and
look for?
children, in the yes, now in the case of women and children, it has been said that investigations must be completed in a time barred span of 2 months. So that is something where I feel either we will require a greater strength of police forces on it, because the workload on the police is immense. As I said, in a lot of instances, I have tremendous sympathy for the police as well. The workload on them is immense. And that is something, a time barred investigation is not possible in all cases. It is not possible in each and every case. So I feel like what we will see is we will see a lot of instances of the police applying for extensions of time to the court if it cannot be done expeditiously. What will be beneficial, however, is it will prioritize the expeditious
Hmm.
investigation of cases. So things will not be left hanging forever. Now, what we must keep in mind is these are not only instances of the police going around and asking questions alone. There are also instances that involve things like the forensic labs. When you send things for testing, they often take months because the forensic labs are also overextended, right? So for certain priority cases, yeah, things are rushed along, but otherwise there's a big backlog of work there as well. So we might require, in order to more expeditiously do it, we might require a beefing up of our system of investigation, bringing more cops on board, opening more forensic labs, training more technicians, making sure that things
Hmm.
are
So
moving
there'll be a lot of
forward.
work, a lot of
Yeah, it
backend work
will
that
be
needs
a,
to be.
yes, there is a lot of background work that needs to be put in if we want to ensure that there is any meaningful implementation of these laws.
All right. Thank you so much, Niharika, for really breaking
Thank
it
you.
down for us. I think all our viewers would also find this very, very useful. Thanks so much. And we can only hope that, citizens of India benefit from these new criminal laws,
Absolutely.
and justice comes
Prevails.
fast, because, that
Absolutely.
age old saying, justice delayed is justice denied. Thanks so much. And a big
Absolutely.
thank you to
Thank you for
all
having
our
me
viewers.
on.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Niharika. A big thank you to all our viewers for tuning in. We do hope that you found this conversation useful. Um, India's new criminal laws are an ambitious step forward in India's efforts to ensure that there's speedy justice. However, it's a long road ahead right now, as Niharika was just saying, that it'll require for the police forces to be trained extensively. There has to be a lot of background work that will go into it. Also, a couple of gray areas there, specifically laws like men making false promises could be sent to prison for 10 years. These such laws can go either way. So implementation, again, is the spirit of the law. It's the way the law is implemented. That's what makes all the difference. Thanks so much for tuning in, and keep watching Money Control for more such news and analysis. We'll be back next week with more news on policy and economy. Thanks so much.